Welcome to Business Talk Sister Gawk. I'm Becca, and today's podcast episode topic is the business of broadband. And if you missed the first episode talking about being an internet service provider, Zach Biles is with me from Northern Wireless, and he's sharing all about becoming a company. That was the first episode, and this one's more just about like the overall business of broadband and the industry and what's going on, because as you and I maybe well know, that you could probably only think of around 5 to 10 service providers with names you know. And I want to talk a little bit about that and why that is the case. So Zach, thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Okay, so answer that question for me. Why is it that it seems like there's only a few broadband providers and places to get internet even?
Sure. So, most of the providers are long-standing providers. They've been around, if you think of names, like most people know CenturyLink, Mediacom, they've been around for decades. And they end up with a pseudo-monopoly on an area, because once an area is considered served, we talked a little bit about the government funding, grants and things like that to extend broadband. Once an area is considered in that served category, it becomes ineligible for additional grant funding to build a new provider to come in and build. And it doesn't matter whether that's fiber or cable or DSL services, as long as it meets whatever the minimum broadband standard at the time. Like right now, it's 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits per second up for bandwidth speeds. It's a very low bar. So almost any DSL service, which is kind of like bottom of the barrel, it's utilizing old phone lines that were put in back in the 1950s, that qualifies an area as served. So if that area is considered served, there's no more grant funding, and no other provider would ever make their money back trying to come in and steal all those customers away. And, we talked about the cost of building, if it's fiber or, copper is similar cost-wise, because it's a lot of the same things that you're doing to like put it in the ground or put it on telephone poles. And having that just barrier to entry, even for a big provider, multi-billion-dollar company, they're never going to make their money back coming in and selling internet to a household for $50 a month.
Right. And do you think that's why things like T-Mobile, would you say they're similar to you, and then they use that kind of network or point-to-point service? It's more cost-effective to start competing, which it wasn't before.
Yes. So now the providers like T-Mobile and AT&T have got to the point where they have excess capacity in their network and they can resell it for those type of services. That wasn't the case, even a handful of years ago. They were struggling to keep up with just phone service. Most cellular plans now are, quote unquote, unlimited data, and they now have that excess capacity where you used to have to really be careful how much you were using, because they just didn't have, the cell network was not designed for data service. They had to kind of adapt and adjust things to, it was designed for phone calls, right, which are less than a megabit per second, kilobits per second for a phone call. Now you're talking streaming a, high definition video on Netflix.
We are just so demanding as a country. This is like such a first world nation problem.
100%.
In a lot of ways, right? No, okay, but that's interesting. So it's almost like broadband is still the Wild West in a lot of ways, because it's like, if you can get there first, you can claim the land and it's yours. And that to me is a little bit concerning in some ways, right? Because then what can end up happening is, let's just say that you say, hey, this is what we can offer you. But then all of a sudden, more houses get built in that area. And then all of a sudden, the capacity is maxed. But yet they keep selling that broadband to another house. Does that happen? And
100%.
Okay, and then basically from there, people are actually getting lower speeds than what their contract says. Is that accurate?
I've heard that numerous times.
Okay, so that makes it even more concerning, right?
Yeah.
Because it's almost like you have this, as you say, pseudo monopoly. So what can people actually do about this problem?
So I'd mentioned a little bit ago, or maybe in the last episode, about the BDC reporting that's now being done through the the FCC. And there's a map out there now at bdc.gov, I believe, where you can go and you can actually look up your address, and it will tell you which providers say they can service your address and what speeds they advertise for your address and everything. And if you can't actually get that, like if you've called them and they tell you no, we can't actually service you, you can submit right from that site a challenge to what they're stating they can offer you at your address. And then they have to go and prove that they can actually offer that. So there's a little bit of, and there's I think some fines associated with that if it's determined that they've been basically falsely advertising what they can actually provide for your address.
And is that like in terms of like upload download speeds, or so like if you
upload download latency?
Okay, so if you already have a provider and they promised you this, and now that they're not servicing at the standard they said they could, you go to something like bbc.gov and look up
bdc.gov, yep.
Search your address, and then what do? Like use like a upload download speed recorder on your phone or something, or?
I actually haven't done it myself, but the idea is there's a challenge button where you basically can just fill in and say, I'm not receiving what they said I should be able to get here.
Ooh.
So it's like it gives some like real power back to consumers to challenge what these providers are saying they can provide, and kind of hold their feet to the fire a little bit. Hopefully, I mean, this is a little bit of a new process, so I don't know exactly how it's all going to play out in reality, and I'm sure once lawyers get involved, that'll be a whole thing. But that's the intent of it anyways, is to give consumers back a little bit of that power to say, hey, they said I could have X, this is what I'm paying for, I'm not getting this. Here's a little bit of documentation on, why I'm not getting what I'm paying for. They need to come fix it. Or if a provider has said, yes, we can service your address, like if you go on their website and you fill, hey, like check my address, but then you call them and they say they actually can't, you can challenge on there as well, where like it again, just kind of gives some of that power back to the consumer to say,
no, that's good.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's something that anybody really knows about. With that being said, though, like nobody else is going to come in as a small business unless they can really strategize how financially they're going to break even, right? So it's kind of like cutting out all the small people unless you're really scrappy. Like I would say you're a very scrappy guy. So tell me a little bit about like that aspect of, you see this happening to people. I know you're passionate about like the fact that customers are being taken advantage of by other companies.
Larger providers that they honestly don't care anymore, when you're complaining about speeds, or my Wi-Fi is not working, or I want faster speeds, because there's nothing, like there's no competition that's ever going to come in and overbuild them. Overbuilding meaning like, bring in another service. It's like, like we talked about, not cost effective to do that. So when you have these situations where, customers are complaining, but there's no incentive for the provider to change anything, because, well, who else are you going to get service from? Now that's starting to change a little bit with, T-Mobile home internet, Starlink, those kinds of services. But the downside of those is like they're really designed for that more rural application. And the issue that I've been seeing kind of trending specifically with Starlink is people in town have started to jump on that bandwagon because the broadband services are so terrible even in town that, hey, I can, buy this satellite dish, throw it on my roof and get faster speeds and better service. But it's taking capacity away from people that don't have another option. So like it's really hurtful for the people in the rural areas that it was designed for, this whole idea of, hey, we've got satellites in the sky, you don't need to be connected to anything else, and you can deploy it wherever you are. I mean, cruise ships and everything else, they're using Starlink now as well because there are no other options out on the ocean.
So are you saying that it's more environmentally conscious to, if you live in town, to use fiber and then let people in the rural areas access Starlink? Are you worried about Starlink maxing out? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I have it as a backup at my house because when I first moved there was no other access. So that was my primary means of access with Starlink for a while. And I saw the speeds go from, download speeds of say 200 megabits per second down to like 50 by the time I finally had another option. And then I started using that. And that's exactly what we're seeing kind of across the country, where Starlink can't get satellites up fast enough to meet the demand.
Yeah.
Because of the cost, obviously, of putting satellites in the sky.
So expensive.
They're instantly obsolete
Yeah.
as soon as they go up. Like, it's not like you can go up and work on them.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, there's a lot of technology. They have real fancy things to like do updates and things like that. But essentially, whatever is built in that satellite when it leaves this Earth is what's going to be up there until it dies. So there is no, put in a new router to add additional capacity. Put in a new, they've talked about laser links and things between the satellites. You can't upgrade that once it's up there. Like, you have to just wait for it to die or let it return to Earth and burn up and send a new one. So like the long-term maintenance of that network, I have some skepticism on how that's going to look long-term. What is the lifespan of these things, these lower orbit satellites? There's a lot of they call space junk up there from small asteroids or other things that they have to contend with and try to one of those things hits one of these satellites, it can do some serious damage and take out a whole section of a network.
100%. And with that too, like, think about how far away that is in terms of like if you are counting on that for the United States of America or another country, and all of a sudden we go to war, let's say, and all of a sudden, boom, rocket hits it or whatever it is, like half the nation's out of internet. Like, that's a little bit concerning. Whereas like if there's a lot more spread out points of contact on the ground, it seems to be a little bit more diversified in some ways, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a like better chance that you can kind of work together with other people on it. Like, satellite obviously is very specialized, and one rocket's not going to take out like half the country because there's tens of thousands of Starlinks up there. So like scale wise, I am like scale wise, it may not work out quite that way, but
okay,
I mean, totally valid point. Like, you could take out a large chunk of satellites with a missile or whatever. Trying to do that on the ground would be much more difficult because like identifying where they are. Starlinks, it's like there's not that much other stuff up there. Like, it's pretty easy to figure out where they're at. And then to try to like replace that would be just insane. It's obviously taken them the last 5+ years or whatever to get to the point where they're at now, where they have mostly global coverage. If a large chunk of those were taken out, like, I don't know how long it would take them to like recoup it and get services back online.
Okay, so for the record, don't freak out if you have Starlink. I'm sorry. That wasn't my point. I was just thinking of different things. Mm-hmm. But also, like, think about the fact that, I mean, for a while there, I think it was Google that put these like hot air balloons almost, or some sort of balloon structure over parts of Africa to give internet. Am I right in saying that? Or
I know that Meta did that maybe. For a while. They had like drones that were flying over that were providing some kind of internet access to Africa. Yeah, Google may have done something similar. I know like the Meta one crazy. For sure.
But okay, so this is the other thing that I think is so important for people to know about small business specifically and rural America, is that maybe you live in a metropolitan area and you don't even have an internet problem. You have all these providers you can access. Well, that's just not true of the rest of the world. And so with this rural aspect, if we look at the funding, even that the federal or the state governments are putting out there, they're all primarily still focused on fiber. Mm-hmm. Are they not?
They are.
Yeah. And that's concerning because that's not like a good use of taxpayer dollars, I would say, in terms of cost effectiveness. Why do you think it's so hard for them to update their funding support for these rural areas?
Honestly, I think it's just being out of touch with what rural America is. The large fiber providers also have a lot of lobbyists in Washington saying, this is what we need, this is what we need. As a small business, obviously you can't compete with that. You just don't have the funds, don't have the manpower to go and speak up. That one organization, WISPA, is one of those organizations that is trying to, give small providers a voice and, help out in Washington. They've had some success. It's kind of limited. It'll be interesting to see how things go now, especially when you have, companies like Google who they tried the fiber thing. Obviously, Google's got deep pockets. They're not going to invest in something that's going to, continually lose them money. And they've completely moved away from building out fiber and are doing all wireless, whether, RF based, light based. They've done some laser stuff. A lot of really cool and interesting things that I'm excited to see where all that goes. But, it's like, okay, if you have a company as big as Google that said, hey, fiber's too expensive, this doesn't make sense. Like, that to me, that means something.
Mm-hmm. No, totally. And I guess, I had a couple more questions around, what do you think the future is going to look like in the internet or broadband space right now?
Honestly, everything is just needing more and more connectivity, right? Everything from your watch now to your car to your refrigerator
robot
vacuums. It's all connected to the internet now. Mm-hmm. So, internet needs are only increasing. So, bandwidth needs are increasing. Just the availability of coverage. You look at telecommuting for people that want to live in these rural areas. They want to live on a lake. They want to be able to have some property, but they work for a hospital or they work for a tech company. Internet is one of those things that can really connect people and allow them to live life in a way that they want to live it and not be limited by where they have to work or have to be within a certain proximity of where they work, where you look at telemedicine and things like that where they're doing surgery over the internet essentially. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but having a doctor in Japan doing a remote surgery on somebody in the US or whatever,
is that a thing?
Utilizing the internet. Yeah.
Do they have
I don't, it may not be international, but I have seen some studies
robots of doing it.
Robots, yes, but also just remote doctors. So a doctor in California might be doing a surgery on somebody in New York via an internet connection. It's obviously it's a private secured connection. So don't want to freak people out that, the next time you go in for surgery, the guy in the room isn't the one actually operating on you. That it's very, very rare, and it's only been tested in a few cases as far as I'm aware. But to me, that's kind of the future of things. You could literally be a doctor living on in a cabin on Side Lake, and if your connection was stable enough, be able to come and do a surgery for somebody in South Texas because you're the specialist, right?
So you're the guy that does the one thing. The other person as they're doing the surgery. Is that what you're saying?
Either consult or potentially. I think we're quite a ways off from this, but actually doing the surgery from here down there.
How do you even do that? How do you do that?
You would have a robotic type system that you would have controls and stuff.
Got it. Okay.
Which
that's what I was.
I think they're doing mostly now, anyways. Laparoscopic surgeries and stuff now. They're controlling with a set of controls what's going on inside your body. They're not physically holding a lot of the tools anymore.
Right.
It's robotics and stuff operated anyway.
This is just blowing my mind right now. I apparently am very out of touch with the tech world in this way. Okay. So that could have totally been our GOG portion. But okay, I have one more question for you. Tell me why it's better to work with local.
Yeah. You can pick up the phone, you can call them. They live right here. They know the area. They understand what it means to live in a rural area and what the challenges are, and how important internet is in a lot of these places. A lot of areas in my network don't have great cell coverage even. So when the internet's out, it's difficult for people to even make a phone call because they don't have enough cell coverage inside their house. They have to go outside or stand in the middle of the field and stand on their head to get a cellular signal. And, hey, we can bring you internet access and allow you to make Wi-Fi calls so now you can stay connected with your friends and family.
Yeah, no, totally. So we're going to transition to the GOC portion, but before we do, how can people find you?
Best way is right on our main website, northern-wireless.com. All the information on different service plans and what our coverage area is, and links to get connected.
Yeah, and Zach doesn't have us on his website, but I convinced him that if you mention this podcast, he will give you $10 off an install. Why? Because Zach is growing his marketing where he doesn't get the cops called on him anymore.
Right.
Let's hope. And we're going to talk about that as our gawk portion. So tell me, like, now you got the branding on the truck. So when you drive out places, people aren't like, who is this crazy person in my neighbor's yard? Mm-hmm. So tell me, like, what happened this time you almost got the cops called on you?
Sure. So this time I had my shirt on, I had my logo on it and everything.
A little bit more professional.
A little bit more professional. There in the city of Chisholm is a little bit, the buildings are kind of odd. And there's a couple of buildings where there was a customer's home that was actually connected to a business. And I had to get up on the roof to change out the receiver because it had gone bad. And the way it was mounted, it was easier to work from a lower vantage point on the roof of what I didn't realize at the time was a totally different building, because they're literally attached to each other.
For the record, when he was telling me about this, like, historically this building did used to be one building, and then one property owner decided to put up like a wall between the two. It's just like a plain wall, and then he like portioned them off or something as their own property tax ID so he could sell half of the building. Mm-hmm. But it's like it is one building. Like, if you look at it. So
go ahead. I had stepped down off the customer's roof onto this other roof, and taken a few steps over to get underneath where I needed to work on the receiver, and all of a sudden I had somebody yelling at me. I'm like, couldn't figure out what was going on. Like, I'm up on a roof, like nobody else is up on the roof. This is weird. Mm-hmm. Turn around, and the guy had popped his head out of the access hatch on the roof and was trying to figure out who I was, why I was there, or whatever, and why I hadn't asked to get on his roof. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Had no idea this was a different building. Like, it's all attached. Like, how would I know any differently? And I think he was concerned that I was maybe drilling holes because he has got a rubber roof and that kind of thing. And obviously I wasn't doing anything like that, but one of those situations where I was like, yep, sorry. I got off the roof, went back on the customer's roof, finished what I needed to do, and left for the day.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's all the things you have to think about. And I think that is one of the reasons why I said, this is not a business I would do. Yeah. But I'm sure there's someone else out there interested, because otherwise, why would they stay till the end, right? Mm-hmm. So if you enjoyed this podcast, give it a review on your favorite podcasting platform, or even just like post a comment on some of our social stuff, whatever, and we'll talk with you next time.